Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Portsmouth Historical Society. My talk tonight is on trolleys on Aquidneck Island, and we had trolleys here for a long time, and it's too bad we don't have them now. Wouldn't it be nice to have them and just go out on the East Main Road, get on a trolley, and go to Newport without all that traffic? I've been driving on the island lately, and the traffic coming out of Newport at 2 o'clock and 4 o'clock is crazy. It's really amazing. Well, anyway, on with the trolley talk. Here's the original slide. You have downtown Newport, as you see, and you also have on the right-hand side, you have what was called a party trolley. They had a trolley that you could rent for a party and ride around on the island. That's what that one is. That's why it's so fancy looking. Okay, I'm going to have, I can't deal with the microphone. I'm having trouble. The next slide. Sometimes it's difficult to imagine what transportation was like on this island back in the day. I'm talking about primarily the era of 1889 to 1925. That's when we had trolleys on the island. Interestingly, well, okay, I'll get into that. So, I'm going to have to hold my paper. I'm having trouble reading this. Okay, so mass transit on Aquidneck Island in the 18th century was limited to the Old Colony and Newport Railroad, which was completed in 1864, and various ferries on and off the island, which went back to virtually the beginning of settlements here. In the urban areas in the 19th century throughout the United States, they experimented with horse cars, which were trolley-type cars. Next, Dave. Trolley-type cars that were pulled on a track by a horse. We had horse cars, and I imagine the efficiency wasn't so great. Providence had horse cars. We did not here. The first electrified street railroad came to be in Richmond, Virginia in 1888, and just the next year, Newport got approval for trolley cars, for electrified trolley cars. Construction began immediately, and 2 lines were established. A car barn was built at Commercial Wharf, down on the wharf, and the power plant was built on Spring Street. Next. The 2 lines were set up originally under the Newport Street Railway Company. There were about 4 or 5 different companies that controlled the trolleys. First of all, the Crosstown line, which began at Commercial Wharf and went up Franklin Street to Spring Street and then Levin Street, crossed Bellevue Avenue and on down Bath Road, Memorial Boulevard, and on to the Newport First Beach. Obviously, the beach was the big attraction for trolleys to get people to the beach. And you'll see some numbers which are unbelievable later on. Okay, so the trolley, this is the Crosstown line. There were a number of people on Bellevue Avenue in the mansions at that time who objected to the fact that the trolleys crossed their sacred Bellevue Avenue, which is kind of interesting. The first trip was in August of 1889, and it was popular in the summer with 540,000 riders in 1890 and 774,000 riders in 1891. The fare was a nickel. And the fare on the trolleys was a nickel for a long time. Even when they got interurban lines, which went out on the island, it was a nickel a town. Next. This is pictures of the Crosstown line. Again, I'm sure the picture on the right is very familiar. It's seen often of the trolley going down to First Beach. The other one is the picture of the trolley on Franklin Street. Next. The main line of the trolleys, the line originated at Morton Park in the 5th Ward in Newport, and it went up north to Spring Street, then followed Spring Street to Broadway, and then Broadway to the end of the line which was at 1 Mile Corner. The rails just stopped there. They didn't have any abutments because it was on the middle of the road. So it stopped right there. Next. This trolley shows coming out of Spring Street and turning onto Broadway. Broadway was a pretty busy street that day. Next. Out in the country, as far as Newport was concerned, the trolley is on at Bliss Road on Broadway. And you can see how much traffic there was or wasn't. Okay. Next. The trolley ended, as I said, abruptly at 1 Mile Corner initially. Okay, next slide. Then we get the Newport and Fall River Street Railway. As the trolleys got popular and mass transit was popular, and again, mass transit was something it was very new, because this is a time when people, if you don't have a trolley, you have a horse and buggy. And this is really the pre-car era. Okay, so the trolleys came out out Broadway, and there came to be a demand for extending it further out on Aquidneck Island. Next, this is out in the country, in Middletown. At one scene in the summer and one in the winter time. Getting closer to home, the next slide has the trolley stopped at across the street almost. Okay, and for some reason the photographer was able to get the motorman to go out and stand next to his trolley in the middle of a snowstorm. Next we have at the intersection of Main Road and Church Lane, right in front of the church there. One of the things about the trolley line was, and this is an important thing to see, as you'll see in some of these slides, is that where it was a trolley stop, they would paint the post white. You'd see this white stripe, and that's what that is right there. This is right by the church there. And next, a little further out, you have the East Main Road, and on the left, the building that sticks out with a porch was David Anthony's barber shop and pool hall. Okay, and later Miska's rug, and I think it's still a rug store today. It's still there, but the porch isn't there anymore. Next, a trolley barn was built in Portsmouth, just north of the Citizens Bank, which wasn't there then, obviously, but in that big open field there. And this is a picture of that trolley barn with an open car and a closed car at that car barn. Next slide shows the Portsmouth car barn a little bit later. The Portsmouth car barn was torn down about 1945. It fell down, I think, by that time. The power station was on Power Street, down over the hill, and that was a supplementary station for the trolley line. The main power came from Newport, but this was in case they needed more power out in the country. Okay, next. Here you have a trolley heading south on East Main Road and a horse and buggy out in front. I hope the bell rang on the trolley so you know to get out of the way. But again, East Main Road, not much traffic. Next. The trolley on the left is at the top of the hill going down to Island Park. And the picture on the right is the amusement park at Island Park, part of the amusement park. The horse and buggy was the merry-go-round was the first building at Island Park. And next to it on the right is the trolley station. The park at Island Park was built by the trolley company in order to encourage riders. And so that's the basis for it. And it was there from 1905 to 1938. The next slide shows the expanse of it. You can see the roller coaster on the right. You can see the shore dinner hall on the left. One of the things I am amazed at when I drive down Park Avenue is that at that time, the beach must have been about twice as wide as it is now, because all these buildings were built out over the beach. And I assume it was probably the 38 hurricane that cleaned it up. But you could probably not even get the roller coaster on the beach that's there now. Anyway, next slide. Here you have a trolley, again on a busy day, crossing the busiest connection to the mainland, okay, the Stone Bridge. Trolleys coming from Tiverton to Portsmouth. The Stone Bridge went through many buildings. There are at least 7 stone bridges. The first one was built in 1794, and it washed away 3 months later. Then they tried again and again and again. The 1815 one lasted pretty well into the late 19th century. But at the turn of the century, they decided that we needed a bigger bridge there. And the United States government said we needed a bigger bridge there too, because the ships were having trouble getting through there, especially the ships that were going to the oil depots over in Tiverton. So they built a new one it opened in 1908. It opened again in 1912. Next slide. The reason they had there's a wicked tide through there, by the way. Most of you know, I hope, because I've said it so many times, that the Sakana River is not a river. Okay? And the flow of the current through there can be anything from 2 to 7 knots. And so what happened with many of the stone bridges was that the current washed out the underpillings of the bridge. And so even when they built it brand new, I think they spent something like $7 million on it in 1908, it still washed out. So they had to rebuild it again. And this is a photograph of them testing it. We had a lot of supervisors testing the bridge, you can see. The weight they had probably was as much as the trolley. But this was a special trolley loaded with heavy stone in order to test the viability of the bridge. And it was a drawbridge, as you probably know, and it opened in the middle. It opened to let almost any boat through, in some cases fishing boats through. Next slide. This shows you the long view of the stone bridge. And again, the stone bridge lasted in business until 1956. And it was torn down in 1958 with the Sakana River Bridge replaced it, the first Sakana River Bridge. On the right, you see the trolley at Stonebridge Inn. And I post pictures of Portsmouth and Tiverton on Facebook, 3 pictures every week. And when I posted this picture for Tiverton's site, I got 140 likes. People really miss the Stonebridge Inn. It's amazing the comments, how people talk about that. Okay, another branch of the, next slide, of the trolley line was the training station branch. We had a lot of people at the Naval Training Station. It was mainly the recruiting station for the Navy. And so a branch of the Newport line was built around 1903, which went from Broadway to Farewell Street, out Farewell Street to Walnut Street, to the point section, and then on out to the naval base, just beyond the naval hospital, where the naval hospital used to be. And it crossed the bridge there, and was used by the Navy, a lot of Navy people. The next slide shows you that. It shows you sailors waiting by the Naval War College and to come out onto the trolley. The next slide, part of that slide shows the trolley turning onto I don't know, it's probably onto Walnut Street there. Next slide shows even more of that. You can see the number of sailors that were either walking or riding the trolley, and then the location of the station right at the foot of the hill at the War College there. Okay, next we have the Old Colony and the Old Colony Street Railway Company. There were all kind of mergers. What do you have to imagine, and I can show you a picture, I don't have a slide of it, but the trolley lines spiderwebbed all over New England. And with connections, you could ride a trolley from Newport to Portsmouth, New Hampshire. You'd have to make a few changes along the way. But that's how widespread the trolley lines were. They're very popular, as you can imagine. That was the only form of mass transportation. We didn't even have buses yet. Okay, so it was really popular. So mergers took place, obviously, as these lines grew, and the lines on Aquidneck Island in 1901 were merged with the Old Colony Street Railway Company, headquartered in Brockton, and overall it controlled more than 300 miles of trolley tracks. The merger lasted until 1911, when the Old Colony line of the streetcars was taken over by the Boston and Northern Street Railway Company and became the Bay Shore Street Railway Company. By the way, the term streetcar is very common. Obviously, trolley is another name for it. I grew up in the city of Pittsburgh, and I went to high school on the trolley every day. Pittsburgh was a trolley city all over the place. Okay, next, the car barns. We have the trolley companies, as they expanded, built new car barns to protect their cars and abandoned the one on Commercial Wharf. Here are the Vernon Avenue Car Barn in Newport, which was new in 1906. It's still there today. It's a construction company building. It's right behind Jesus Savior Church.
Yeah, I don't have that slide for some reason.
Oh.
Your last slide, you probably on the west side of the first
I don't. Wait a minute. That's later. It's all pictures for a while. There you go. The Vernon Avenue Car Barn, and you could see inside how they did maintenance on the trolleys. They had this big opening underneath where they would work on them. Okay, go to the next one. Let's see what we got. All right, this is the Middletown Car Barn. A lot of us remember the Middletown Car Barn. It was there till about, 10 years ago, I guess. It was a trolley barn, then it was a bus barn. Okay, and it finally fell down, I don't know. And the other picture here shows it in the wintertime, where they went out and shoveled the tracks going into it. The Newport and Providence, next slide, the Newport and Providence line on the West Main Road. This is, hard to believe, this is the view from just about in front of, what's it now? I can't think of the names of the stores. Anyway, St. Lucy's Church, looking south. The only houses you see are the ones over on the right-hand side that are still there, but it's been built up a little bit since. What's unique about this particular photograph is that the little station that you see on the left was built because the owner of the president of the trolley line lived in a house there. So he had his own private station. Again, that's just about in front of St. Lucy's Church today. Okay, next. As the trolley lines traveled into the countryside, the island and some hills became too difficult for the trolleys. The trolleys traveled, by the way, at no more than 10 miles an hour. And they got to some of these hills where they couldn't accomplish, the trolley couldn't make it. So they went inland at several places along the line. And if you walk through those fields out there someday, you'll see the telephone poles are still there, where the trolley line. This picture shows just out in the country. Again, they butchered a few farm fields to put the trolley line through. You can see. The next slide. This is an artistic photograph. I think it was probably done commercially for the trolley line. The trolley sits at the top of Raytheon Hill, heading south toward Newport. What happens after this, where the trolley was here, is that it went inland. It went inland over what is now the Wanamatanmi Golf Course. Again, it went that way because Raytheon Hill was too steep, and so they had to get into the interior some. And that trolley is, again, I think it's a commercial photograph, but it's waiting to go to the left over the hill. And the next slide shows it from the other direction. You're looking back toward, you can see Boyd's Windmill in the picture there. You can see people biking and walking on the West Main Road. And you see the trolley on its way. Next, you have right by Melville School today. Oh no, right by Melville School, the trolley again went inland, right where that cabin section is there. That was steep because the important Turkey Hill, as we know it, was too steep also. So it went inland way back there, just across from Melville School, and crossed the country and came up to the Portsmouth Camp Meeting. And this is a photograph at the Portsmouth Camp Meeting, which also, interestingly, on the trolley, advertises the Portsmouth Camp Meeting. And it went, again, by the Portsmouth Camp Meeting, down over the hill to Freeborn Street, and then turned right, and then left, and went down the main road there. Okay. Great page here. The line went down the hill up to Freeborn Street, and again turned. This is, next slide, is a photograph of the trolley line coming onto Freeborn Street. Again, that you can see how much they butchered the landscape to get the trolley lines through there. And this is turning left onto the road there toward the wharf. It followed Turnpike Avenue then to Bristol Ferry Road and the ferry wharf. Now, I have to say this every time I talk about the Bristol Ferry Wharf. The Bristol Ferry Wharf, as we know it today, was not the wharf at that time for the trolleys. If you ever drive down over that hill, and I know the neighbors are complaining about it, if you take a left on Ferry Road, which is right before you get to the Bristol Ferry landing, if you take a left there, and it winds down a little bit, and on the water, underneath the Mount Hope Bridge, a little bit north of the Mount Hope Bridge, you can still see last time I looked anyway, you can still see the pilings that were there for the ferry wharf, the trolley wharf. Okay, so it didn't go down to Bristol Ferry landing as we know it today. It cut short of that, south of that, and went across. And these are pictures, let me see where we are. Pictures of the next slide shows some of that going down Turnpike Avenue and then down the hill to the left, Ferry Road, and then on to the wharf. Next slide. The wharf was big. The next slide shows a picture of it and shows people waiting to get on it. Every time I post this picture, everybody says, look at that little girl, she's all dressed up. But this was, again, this is not Bristol Ferry Wharf as we know it today. I don't know why I can't get that through to people. Anyway, they had a waiting room there, and they had the trolleys. And the next slide shows pretty impressively how big of a wharf it was. Again, it's off Ferry Road, and the train tracks went over it. Okay. The next slide shows, it's a sad slide, because it shows the latter days of the ferry. The wharf is really beat up. This is probably about 1923 or 24. Money wasn't being spent on repairing it, and you might wonder how the trolley got across all that. The next slide shows a transition from trolleys to buses. The buses, this would be the Providence Newport bus, and this would be just about the time they're building the Mount Hope Bridge, it was completed in 1929. But you can see it's a rather expansive wharf, and there's a lot of room on it. And again, I haven't been down there lately, but I think the ruins of it are still there. The next slide shows the Bristol ferries. There were two. There were the Bristol was one, and I'm having trouble reading this. The Bristol was one, and the Sagamore was the other. The Sagamore was a boat that carried people across. It didn't carry cars or horse and buggies or anything. And then the top postcard shows the combined two, and they only ever had two. The Bristol ferry and the trolley line out there was a big investment for a bunch of people from Newport. And obviously, you would take the ferry across to Bristol, then you'll get on the train from Bristol and go to Providence that way. Okay. So what happened? Next slide. Trolley ridership peaked in 1912, 1913, and other forms of mass transportation appeared. As we all know, the automobile appeared, the truck, the bus, and a jitney, which was a small bus. And the trolleys all of a sudden were really hurting for ridership because you had all these other alternatives. The Newport Electric Company took over the power, light, and railway property of the Newport Electric Company, and changes were made to upgrade the trolleys and the tracks, but it didn't seem to help. In 1924, the Electric Corporation was planning to establish bus lines in the town. The advantage of the buses was they could go anywhere. The trolleys had to stay on the tracks, obviously. So that's the beginning of the end of street railways in Newport as bus routes began to replace them. Trolley service began to disappear. Again, it's the service on the line, the interurban line that is from Newport to elsewhere, peaked about 1913, 1914. And on February 28, 1925, the Newport to Fall River line was replaced by buses. Okay. The next slide shows you some of the buses, and also shows you what Washington Square looked like back in those days. At least two cars and a couple of horses and buggies. The picture on the left is the bus coming off the Bristol ferry. It rode the ferry. Next slide shows, and this is bizarre, in 1924, next Dave. In 1924, they replaced a lot of the trolley tracks along Broadway, redid them, which is kind of weird, because as we know, as I just mentioned, the next year, they went out of business. Anyway, next page. Drop things. Now, what's interesting in the next slide is that the trolley tracks were still there. And in some cases, I think they still are on Broadway. This was the case in 2013 when they were digging up the trolley tracks by the Newport Hospital. They were still there then. And the asphalt wears off every once in a while, and occasionally you can see the top of the trolley line. So it was all gone by 1925. The trolley era ended. The next slide is my favorite slide, one of my favorite photographs actually, and it's taken on Spring Street. And you have a trolley, you have another trolley, you have another trolley, you have a horse and buggy, and you have a car. But I have to wonder who gave way. I think that's really an interesting combination photograph. Next, the end of an era. Okay. Mass transportation changed dramatically over the 20th century. And of course, there was the advent of the automobile, which sometimes we regret today, which allows vehicles to go anywhere they wanted. The trolley line perhaps could solve some of the problems of Aquidneck Island today. I mean, we're going to have the East Main Road repaved about 5 feet, 2 feet on each side. That'll solve a lot of problems. I live on the East Main Road. I know how busy it is, and it's 25,000 cars a day. I also live on Sandy Point Avenue, which is 5,000 cars a day. Anyway, it would be nice to have some kind of mass transit back. I mean, even the railroads left when we tore down the railroad bridge across the Secaunet. And the railroads were really important too, because look what happened after the railroads left. Weyerhaeuser left. The various industries on the island left, and it became a bedroom community. If you could see the Weyerhaeuser property today, which you can't because of the gate, but I got down there recently, and it's amazing. Condo after condo after condo. And of course, part-time residents. A friend of mine who knows a lot about Newport history said that in about 5 years, Portsmouth's going to have more people than Newport. Portsmouth has about 17,000, 18,000 now. At the turn at World War II, it had 2,500. Okay. So population growth is unstoppable around here. Anyway, so the trolley era, in summary, the trolley era was really an important period. It was an important period because people could really get around. If you wanted to go to Fall River, you stop across the street here, get on the trolley, and go to Fall River. It was an easy connection. It would take a while, but it cost you about 10 cents. And I mean, it's just, the trolley era was really important. One of the things I've done in my career is collect transportation stuff. And if after I'm done here, which is just about now, there's a whole display of stuff up here of the trolley times. I've been collecting this stuff for about 40 years. And there are 2 full albums of trolley pictures. Someone asked me before, was that just a part of my collection? It's 2 albums of 83 of Newport County. Anyway, there's some newspaper articles there. There's some 1905, 1906 newspaper articles, and I would ask you to handle them very carefully because they're fragile. Anyway, I will finish with that. I will be happy to answer any questions anybody has. Please let me know. Yes?
I was told that when the trolley companies went out of business, the metal was scrapped, but the trolley bodies were given out or sold for cottages. And I believe there's one still on West Shore Road.
There was some of that, but most of the trolleys were taken to Bristol Ferry, loaded on board ships, and taken to Asbury Park, New Jersey. That's where a lot of them ended up. But I mean, they had so many that I'm sure some probably. Yeah.
If you kayak by West Shore Road, you can still see the trolley body there.
Yeah, there's one or two in the Friends, the campgrounds behind the Friends Meeting House. There are one or two there too. So they really made use of them. But I have photographs. I didn't put them in the slideshow, but I have photographs of about 6 trolleys lined up by the Bristol Ferry that were transferred onto ships and taken down there. Other questions? Yep.
When you wanted to take a ferry somewhere, did the service run from early morning to late at night, or like how would that go?
The ferries ran, some of us experienced running for the Newport ferry, trying to make the last ferry. Some of they were pretty much daylight ferries. And so early in the morning, 8, 9, something like that. And especially the Bristol ones just went from Portsmouth to Bristol, and then they came back, and then they went again. I mean, they probably made, I think I have a schedule somewhere, that the Bristol ferries made at least 8 trips each way every day at the peak of their season.
And what about the trolleys? Did they run?
The trolleys ran just about less than hourly. It was like 45 minutes or so out the east and west main roads. You didn't have to wait very long, and it was a known schedule. You knew what time it was going to be coming, so you didn't have to wait. But they really, I don't know, you really think about it. Why not bring them back? Wouldn't that be great? But we're so into car travel. We want to go where we want to go when we want to go there. So probably wouldn't have much ridership these days. But anyway, it's an interesting era of our history. And it's kind of a microcosm when you look at Aquidneck Island and you see that there were 2 lines all the way out the east and west main roads. Those 2 roads, by the way, go back to colonial periods. They were laid out about 1640. And just about as wide as they are now, I think. So. Other questions? Anything anybody has? Yes, Lois.
You were saying that at 1 mile corner the tracks stopped abruptly. How did they turn around?
The trolley, I guess I should have explained this before. Trolleys had lines up in the telephone poles, but they also had what was called the trolley, which was a pole, one in the front, one in the back. They also could be driven from the front or the back. So they would just change the poles, move up to the front, and go back that way. They didn't have to worry about turning around. Yeah, that's something that went well into the 20th century in trolleys. I as I said before, I rode trolleys for 4 years to high school. So Pittsburgh was a trolley city. Yes.
Going back over these, I was wondering if the average person that lived on the island could afford to travel on these, or were they mostly for, as we call them, tourists nowadays?
Yeah, the tourists could go. You could park your car if you once you had even when you had a car later on. You could park your car in the vicinity of, well, where High Life became, and then you could take a trolley into downtown Newport. Can you imagine what downtown Newport would look like with trolleys? God, so great.
Taking the railroad tracks out.
Yeah. Well, the railroad, that's another lecture, but the railroad, the first one came in 1864. They had to rebuild it in 1898, but the railroad was really important. There were, in 1930 and 1940, there were 8 trains in and out of Newport every day. Railroads were really important, and the connections between Newport and Fall River were very much stronger than they are now. So the railroads were really important. Of course, when they built the first Mount Hope Bridge, they took down the railroad bridge, which was in really bad shape, but they made no plans to replace it, which is sad, because that affects commerce, it affects travel, it affects a lot of things, having a railroad line on the island. Of course, now we have the tourist railroad. That's about all that's left. Any other questions? Yeah.
Is there any place we could see where some of these trolleys are in a museum somewhere so we could see them and what they look like?
In Connecticut somewhere, there's a trolley museum. I can't remember the town.
East Haven,
What is it?
East Haven.
East Haven, Connecticut. And again, in where I grew up in Pittsburgh, there's a huge one there, which I'm a member of, believe it or not. But yeah, so they've been retained, not in any kind of bulk, but the different kinds are still around in those museums. I think there's another one down south somewhere.
Up in Maine too.
Maine, yeah. So again, it's a fascinating era of our history, and something that it's kind of fun to get back into it and think about what it was like. Any other questions? Yes.
So the trolley lines, will it follow like the main transmission lines? Because I know it comes in like on Freeborn and cuts through Headley and then over the main road, and the other line comes in off by Raytheon. Or on
Yeah.
the pond. I don't know if that was the route that they used to go.
Where you see the power lines today, in a lot of cases, that's the trolley followed that line. Again, right in the middle of, just beyond the camp meeting on Headley Street, it going south, it goes off into the fields, and you can see the power lines are still there, and so they follow the power lines. I mean, they had their own lines, obviously, but and in fact, some cases the power lines are built on the trolley poles and trolley lines, because we didn't have total electricity on this island for probably 1920, 1918, and so a lot of cases they use the same poles. Any other questions? Yes.
My mom grew up in New Bedford, and she said she thinks she remembers, she never was sure, taking the trolley from the south end of New Bedford over to Highland Park. You mentioned that things went in all different directions.
Yeah, you probably have to make a few changes, but you could go from New Bedford to Fall River, and in Fall River you could get on the Newport and Providence and get to the Island Park that way. Again, I want to emphasize this very strongly. Island Park was built by the trolley company to encourage ridership, okay? And it did that. I mean, Island Park had a lot of people in it in 1910s and 20s. And a lot of them came by trolley. There weren't many cars, and there wasn't any place to park cars anyway. But I'm just fascinated by that one photograph that shows the Island Park amusement park. It had to have been much wider, and it probably was the fact that a 10-foot wall of water came up in 1938 and washed a lot of it out. I've been told that there are, out under the water, there are still some pilings and things like that from the original park. But the 38 hurricane just destroyed what was left of it, and it was in decline by that time anyway. Again, the trolleys were gone, and but again, that's another lecture, Island Park. But anyway, yes.
Hi, if you walk along the beach at Island Park, you can still see old structures. Wooden structures don't seem to make any sense.
Yeah, low tide, you can see stuff up to the south end there. Yeah. And when the 38 hurricane hit, some houses in Island Park were washed over to the country club on the other side. I mean, and 18 people died in Island Park because there was no escape bridge up at the north end, and the area at this end flooded, so people couldn't get out. Plus, one person, there's a story of a woman and her 2 kids who floated down the Narragansett Bay on top of their house, were picked up by the Navy eventually under the Mount Hope Bridge. Whew, it's a scary trip. Yes.
Sort of winter scene with lots of snow. Who got the job of plowing before the trolley could go through the snow?
The trolleys had trolley plows, and in a lot of cases they got through before the street plows did. I have a number of pictures that show the trolley line bare and the street next to it having about 2 or 3 feet of snow on it. Question in the back?
The 38 hurricane made it on the Montauk Golf Course.
Made what?
The bubble of the wave
Hmm.
came in on the 38 hurricane, made it as far as Montauk Golf Course.
Yeah.
Right up to the
Who's that?
Came under the railroad tracks.
I met one person one time who his parents ran the amusement park, And he said he remembers seeing it, this 10-foot wall of water coming up the Secundit River all the way from the ocean. And it just destroyed most of Island Park. That was the end of it. I have to say one other thing. Island Park is under revival. And there are a lot of good restaurants there, and I think that it's worth exploring. I don't want to see another hurricane come through there, but it's really been upgraded a lot. And I would encourage you to drive down there, look around, go to eat. Any other questions? Yes?
I have a question. Do you have the route of the trolley?
Yes.
From the Island Park Bridge to Newport?
Yeah. They might be in one of these notebooks here. Yeah. Yeah. Again, mainly follow the main roads, but where the hills were too steep, it would go inland, where it was flatter. I don't think it ever, to my knowledge, it never goes toward the shore. It always goes inland. And you can still see the power lines. I mean, just drive down Union Street, and you can see the power lines going across. Okay. Any final questions? Yes?
Exactly where was that merry-go-round?
Speak up.
Where was the merry-go-round in relation to?
The merry-go-round was, let me think, right about where the used car repair place is on the right-hand side there. Right in that vicinity. Frank's Auto, yeah. It was, I mean, it was a going place. It's amazing. I have pictures of crowds there. And they would have cross the river swims and things like that, where they'd have probably 2,000 people there on a Sunday afternoon.
They have horse jumping.
Oh, I didn't want to mention that. They had a platform above water where they would raise a horse up there and lower the platform. I have pictures of that, but you'll never see them. It's really sad, I think. God, I don't know how many horses they killed. Other questions, finally? Again, take some time to come up here if you have a chance and look at some of this stuff. And we have refreshments?
Yes, we do.
We have refreshments downstairs, so stick around and I'll wander through and thank you all for coming. Appreciate it.